I see the mind as a tool, but not the only tool in the toolbox. And very often we get used to and end up with a favorite tool, but that tool isn't appropriate for every situation. But to continue with the metaphor, the body gets used to holding that particular tool in a certain way. So when we let go of it, it feels like something is missing. And we yearn for it and we want it back because we want to, if it's a hammer, beat something. If it's a screwdriver, we want to turn something. I don't take either position to be the only possibility. Thoughts are a hindrance and bad, and we have to get rid of them.
Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh of Integrating Presence, Inner Skill 2, and today I have Jacques Rusky with me. Jacques, what's going on?
Not much. I try to live as simple life as possible, but today is a good day. I had a good night's sleep.
Oh, lovely. All right, I will give you the standard question here. Who is Jacques and what kind of work does he do?
It's an interesting question. Who is Jacques from a Buddhist point of view? If we accept or eventually have the experience of seeing the arising and passing away of the self, then the sense of identity dissolves. And so Jacques is just a name. But to answer your question more commonly, I would say that currently I live in Evanston, Illinois. I teach meditation. Many of my students are from Oberlin College or were from Oberlin College. I lived there for about 15 years teaching the students. And prior to that, lived in Woodside, California. And prior to having a dramatic illness, viral encephalitis, I was a psychotherapist for 20 years in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. I would consider, most people would consider me retired, but for me, teaching is semi-full-time. And I really enjoy the connection with people who are very interested in meditation, anywhere from a beginner to someone who's been sitting for 25 or 30 years. And I like being challenged.
Well, great. So do I. And I like asking a lot of questions. That's why I have a podcast too, right? But but I can sense the depth of your practice, so I'm so great. I reached out to you and just tell the listeners here how I found you. I practice with some of your maybe current and ex-student, and I won't say the names, but I'm really impressed with both of them, of course. And so when they listed you as one of their teachers and I hadn't seen or heard your name before, I thought, well, this is interesting. I got to go find Jacques here. And I looked online and I didn't see any audio interviews or video. And I thought, well, here's a gold mine. I've struck the gold, in a certain sense, right? Or maybe I just didn't do my web search well enough or something like that. But
no, you did. You did.
I did. Okay. Well,
yes,
great.
Yes.
So glad I reached out then.
I have no ambition to acquire a large following and don't write books on meditation. There are enough books written about meditation. I'd rather have personal contact with people. One of the difficulties these days when you have a teacher is that that teacher has hundreds of students. And even if you go on retreat, it's unlikely that you'll actually have an interview with the teacher. You'll have interviews with their students. And I'd much rather have a deeper connection with people. And so I see fewer students, and it's nice to watch the development of a deeper state of the practice over time.
It is a really good point here. I mean, I see the pros and cons of each. On one hand, we can bring more people to the Dhamma that way. But like you said, there's something to be said about putting this me bag in front of another me bag. Well, hopefully it's a meat suit instead of a me bag. That's kind of when we get into unhelpful selfing. That's a Ajahn Sucitto term that I really love. It's just kind of humorous too, of how the selfing that you talked about at the beginning can be. But yeah, there's something to be said about it. And these experiences, I think, are becoming more rare and at the same time more cherished. So and hopefully we don't romanticize it too much, because we do hear some spiritual stories where people, go off in the Himalayas and try to seek a guru that doesn't have any I think those are really heartwarming and uplifting stories, So there's something to be said about that. So yeah, I feel there's pros and cons to both of these approaches. And I will just say, teacher I'm working with now is kind of on the same vein. You have to be a really dedicated practitioner to work with him. And we still haven't got to meet in real life just due to a lot of different, I would say, challenges. But the time seems like it could be coming. So I love this model too of having. For many years, I didn't have a core teacher in my practice. I was kind of wary, and I can just do it from books and Dhamma talks and my own. But there is really something to be said about one-to-one access with a teacher that is, especially if one resonates, right? So finding that
Yes.
match of someone we really respect and admire, but not only that we're actually seeing benefits in our own lives, and then that's kind of rubbing off with others too, and maybe I'm being a little bit hypocritical too, because I have a podcast here. I talk to a lot of people from all walks of life, and it does get a little bit of bigger reach, but not like some of the huge ones either. So I want to say there's a time and a place and pros and cons for all these approaches, but I just wanted to acknowledge that and give that validation, because I find that really very helpful in my own experience, when at one time I didn't really see it or value it as much. So I just want to throw that out there too. Yeah.
Of course. And I started out at the age of 16 observing my family, and especially my parents, noticing how unhappy they were. And I didn't want to end up that way. And so, not having any teacher available outside of Detroit, Michigan, I found a spiritual bookstore and sort of browsed every possible option that was available until I came across the Pali Canon and started reading. First book of meditation was helpful, and I think due to my own lethargy and lack of understanding, mostly I would fall asleep. And then, but I kept at it with finding the Satipatthana Sutta as the main book that I would read from and gain understanding from, and kept meditating. And when I went to Oberlin College, turns out that my roommate was also a meditator. And a year later, I was making preparations to leave for Thailand to become a monk. This was after doing my first retreat with Joseph Goldstein.
And what year was this? Around what years?
1974.
Wow. So you came to the Dhamma early. And I would just, a brief background. I wish I would have had kind of more wholesome, skillful introduction. But like many of us, we come through the dukkha door, I think, to practice. For me, it was the beats, and I found out later that, why it was exciting, kind of thrilling. And they did have some, knowledge of Dhamma. that's maybe not the most wholesome, skillful way that I would have liked to, but it was better than nothing. I looked around. All right, I saw the Four Noble Truths. I say, oh, it hit me real hard, suffering. Oh, yeah, that's what's going on. I could see it I could see it. But then the second Noble Truth, okay, I don't understand that. Third Noble Truth, oh, that's great. But fourth noble, I don't understand any of this. This is completely over my head. So I was completely overwhelmed by that first noble truth. I could see, yeah, there's no doubt. But for no wisdom, no kind of Sila whatsoever, unfortunately. So then it kind of hit like a ton of bricks years later. But, use that to the advantage of an opportunity for coming to the Dhamma. So in that sense, it's not all that bad. And it sounds like you've had some challenges in your life too. So you're no stranger to the dukkha door either. But I think it's quite amazing that you had the good fortune and probably maybe past parami to get in when you did. And so before we get into Anapana, where I want to focus more on, continue though with your journey too, about maybe real briefly, if you want to say how you met Joseph Goldstein, maybe how you got involved in the whatever we want to say about the California Dhamma scene. But I'm also interested in Thailand because I'm booked on to do winter retreat at Chithurst in Thai forest tradition of Ajahn Chah, England, in February and March. So yeah, I'm familiar with this tradition and very inspired by them too. And then of course the Satipatthana, it's foundational, right? So yeah, before we get into Anapana, which I want to say a little bit more about, just because I'm kind of a newer generation to this. I didn't live it, and I'd like to kind of know from more, not the huge Dhamma superstars, so to speak, for lack of a better term, kind of how that time period was and what it was like too.
At that time, my roommate from Oberlin, I had gone out west to study at a martial arts academy in Colorado, thinking, oh, that's the thing that I'm going to dedicate my life to in Tai Chi. And I followed that teacher out to California. And then my roommate sent me a message. This was a letter because they didn't have email back then, talking about this retreat in California, and just worked as much as I could to save up money for the retreat. This was 30 days in the Sequoia National Forest silent retreat, my first retreat. And we started out sitting an hour for each sit. And it was so clear after that retreat that this was how I wanted to continue. But I was still looking for a teacher that I felt a deep connection to. And so I was preparing to go to Thailand and just wander and search for a teacher, and got a flyer in the mail that said, well, there's this Thai monk who's coming from England to give a retreat on the East Coast. So I wrote them a letter and said, if I help with the cooking and run the kitchen, because I cooked at Oberlin, can I do the retreat for free? And they said, of course. And so I hitchhiked across the country in the middle of winter. Literally, I started out on December 31st. And when I hit the Rockies, there was an enormous snowstorm. And I remember arriving in New Haven, Connecticut, and meeting the manager of the retreat, who was so kind and welcoming. Then a few days later, we went to New York because my teacher was giving a talk at Chogyam Trungpa's New York Center. And I remember we were sitting up in the balcony, and I was I had never had contact with him. I was still wondering what was going to happen. And the doors open, and he takes 2 steps forward, and the room is filled with people from Trungpa's group. And they're all talking and chatting away. And my teacher just stands there still. And then gradually, people in the room start noticing that the guest speaker has entered the room. And so it was like the Red Sea parting. And he walked very slowly, very self-contained, very mindfully. And I just had this feeling just in my chest. Tears started coming down my eyes. And a phrase came in my mind of, I'm home. And so we had a little bit of contact throughout the first retreat. It was 30 days on the East Coast. And at the end, he asked me if I would come to England to be the cook at his retreat center in the south of England. He liked my cooking, and I would notice very intently when he would go back for seconds and what he would take for seconds, and then I would know, he likes that. So I was cooking for him most of the time, and he was my teacher for 45 years until he died. And I tried as much as possible to go to, for the first 8 years, I was his. Then I became a therapist and would try and go on retreat once or twice a year, wherever he was. And it was a rare and wonderful relationship. And there were these odd little things that made it special. For example, if at the tail end of the retreat, the last day, he would say to me, Jacques, I think this would be a good retreat for you to go to. And he would hand me a piece of paper with an address and a telephone number. It could be in Great Britain, it could be in Germany, it could be in France, it could be somewhere in the United States. And we would have zero contact for a year. And I would just show up in Grenoble, France, at such and such a address. And I would knock on the door and he would open. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, this is great. So I got me in a little bit of an interesting position here, because if you've mentioned it, I missed it. And I'm sure you're okay with sharing the name of the teacher, especially since it's past now. Yeah, please do, because I'm in suspense here.
When he was a monk, his name was Prasobana Dhammasudi. And after he did the 7-year sort of PhD in Buddhism program at Mahachula Longhorn University in Bangkok, he was interested in meditation. And as he told me, no one in the university encouraged him to go into meditation. And so when he graduated, he wandered in the forest and found a teacher and stayed with that teacher for 2 years, and then went back to the monastery where he was staying at. And eventually the abbot of that monastery invited him to England. And because there was a Thai temple in London. And then he realized that those who were interested in meditation were not the Thai people who he was serving, but all the Westerners. And so he found that when he wore a robe and sat on a golden throne at the temple, there was a great personal distance between him and the student. And so he took off the robes and just kept on teaching meditation for the rest of his life.
I see. Lovely.
Excuse me.
Please go through.
And so when he took off the robes, he took another name, which he is mostly known for, Dhiravamsa. V.R. Dhiravamsa. Vichita Ratna Dhiravamsa.
Okay. So for me too, and some of the listeners that don't know kind of this distinction of Thai Buddhism, do you feel it might be helpful to give a little bit of a classification about that to kind of know where he fits in with lineages too?
Well,
or do you think that's important? Or what should be said about that?
That's a good question. Buddhism in Thailand is Theravada Buddhism. And it basically means those who follow or take the Pali Canon as their the writings that were the words of the Buddha. That is sort of like an assumption, although who knows what's happened in 2,500 years, especially since the first 300 years after the Buddha died, everything was a verbal transmission. Now, one of the things that I found very interesting about my teacher was that he was very open to learning about his students and about the culture where he taught. And so when we were on retreat for a month, he would give a talk every other day after lunch, after lunch. And he would include the basics of Theravada Buddhism in a 30-day retreat. But mostly it was his way of understanding the Western mind that allowed him to use language where they could understand what was in the basics of Theravada Buddhism, and especially the Satipatthana Sutta. At that time in his life, he was very adamant that mindfulness was everything. And forget about concentration. That's a waste of time. And later on in life, he started experimenting with the jhana.
I see. I guess where I was going with that, and there's a few other things to throw in here, is in Thailand, I've heard there's kind of a more scholarly direction.
Yes.
And then the other one, and one's more common than the other. Help me with the names here. And then let me throw in a few more really brief things. What year did you go across? And then to the East Coast, and also the first one in the forest. Who was the teacher? Was that and just to help me clarify, who the teacher in that retreat as well? And then one really quick one. Why Thailand? How did you first get your mindset that you wanted to go to Thailand, even though it didn't pan out exactly like that? So there's a few things there.
Because Joseph talked about Thailand and how
Ajahn Chah, right? He was
yes.
Yes. Okay.
He had a very meaningful time with Ajahn Chah, and there oftentimes in any kind of religion, there is a split between those who follow the word and are very academically oriented and those who are very oriented towards experiencing the practice itself. Excuse me for a second.
Sure. And help me remember this. Is it Dhammayut, or help me the classifications, the terms? Do you know these in Thailand? Is it something Ute?
My memory is not as good as it used to be.
Okay.
But I also tend to leave out things that are not so important.
If that it's a good point. Yeah, exactly. So those and familiar with Thai Buddhism will kind of know what I'm alluding to here, but I'm forgetting too, and it's really not that important to have such a classification.
Well, the Thai forest tradition, as far as I know, honors and follows the more ascetic practices that the Buddha allowed. And my teacher was not of that orientation. I think he was very good at picking up on who he was teaching to. And so the ones who were more interested in a more difficult path might end up in Thailand themselves.
I see. Yes, we're from what I'm remembering, the Ajahn Chah, he started off in a more scholarly lineage, and then maybe around when he met Ajahn Mun, and then got into more of the forest tradition. And I can't remember the exact terminology, but it's clear in when we talk about Dhamma practice and study. There seems to be these classifications of general rough classifications of scholarly types and then more practice oriented types, and you get a rare combination where you have some who do or excel in both. And I would say I would add another one, more faith based, and this is a common, I think, throughout different types of religion too. And so I tend to side more with the practice, although I love going deep diving into Pali Canon too. And it reminded me of a thing from the Canon too about, I forget exactly what the reference is, where the teaching is you pay attention to the king's cook, right? And how you're paying it. What does he like? What does he not like? And you'll do a lot more successful if you notice what they like and what they don't like, and then cater to that. I don't know if I'm phrasing that in the most helpful way, but I couldn't help but be reminded of that teaching. And maybe you could elaborate or clarify that a little bit if you'd like. But I do want to move us on here to Anapana. And I guess maybe a jumping in point, since you mentioned Anapana. Since you mentioned Satipatthana, which is, some people say, 4 foundations of mindfulness. I like 4 frames of reference, kind of the 4 establishments of mindfulness too. So, there's a little bit of playing with the words, but basically on the topics of the body. And there's like a 6-fold way to pay attention to the body or be mindful of the body, then into Vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, neither. And then chitta, heart, mind, and then dhammas, which is a whole list of lists. And so it can be, so there's a lot to it in a way. But the reason I bring this up is because if I'm remembering somewhere else, it says those who excel at Anapanasati fulfill the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And I don't know if it's vice versa or not, but the commonality we have through both of these, in Anapanasati, for anybody that doesn't know, is often translated as mindfulness of breathing. So the very first one deals with in and out breath, according to a lot of different translations, and dealing with the bodily formations or the bodily formation. And there's similarities in the Satipatthana about where it starts off with the breath too. So that's the common jumping in point, and I would say thread that runs throughout both of them as they progress or things. So anyway, I want to see how you just kind of approach that in general as maybe a starting in point. And then want to get into how you just as very practical, how you teach students Anapana, and maybe what kind of flavors you add that you don't see in other teachers, or maybe, wherever you want to take it and how you want to jump into this.
Well, one of the things that I really value about mindfulness of the breath, one of the many, is that it's always there. So we don't have to create an image or a thought or an idea. The breath is, for the most part, obvious because we breathe in and we breathe out. Then what comes to my mind when I'm talking with a student is, where do you notice the breath? And some people notice it in the abdomen. Some people notice it in the chest. Some people notice it in their sinuses, and some in the tip of the nose. And when I began teaching, I was a bit rigid in following what my teacher taught as well as what was in the text. And when people had difficulty, I would interpret that as, well, they didn't have enough concentration. They were impatient. Their need for stimulation was higher than one might get if you're just sitting still and noticing the breath. And over time, I came to realize that the fault was not in the student, but in me. And I began to ask my students, well, where do you notice the breath? And they would tell me. And I said, well, if you notice it there the most and it's obvious, stay with that and let's see what happens. So it all became like an experiment between the two of us, trying to find what worked. And so mindfulness of the breath is both a concentrative technique because we're focusing the mind away from extraneous circumstances, sounds, sensations, and we're coming just to the breath. And so that develops concentration. Mind begins to, and then it's easier to see what arises, whether it's in the body, in feelings, in consciousness, or mental objects. And for most people, staying with the breath can be the main challenge of the practice for years. And I've had a few students after a period of time, 5 or 10 years, say, why didn't you tell me it was going to take this long for me to be able to stay with the breath for maybe half a sitting? And I said, well, I didn't want to discourage you, so I just respond to what they ask about. I find that the breath, as you said, is not just the beginning of the practice. And then, as stated in the Satipatthana Sutta, then there is, I always forget these words, it's mindfulness of the body moving, clear comprehension.
Sampajanya, right? Sati Sampajanya?
Yes, basically being aware of wherever you are and whatever you're doing. And then the practice continues to pay more attention to what's going on inside as the mind becomes more settled and aware. See, going back a little bit. So I find that the breath can be both an anchor in the sense of concentration, but also a refuge when things become overwhelming and there's too much going on, especially inside the mind. Going back to the breath can become a refuge from all of that chaos until the mind calms down, and then we can notice what is going on because we're not reacting so much. And in our culture these days, most of the students who come to me have been trained on screen and are so used to so much stimulation. I remember one student told me about how much he was addicted to his telephone. And I was curious. I asked him, I said, how much time do you spend on your telephone? And he said, oh, I can find out. And so he got the telephone and punched a few buttons, and he said, yesterday I spent 6 hours on my telephone, and little of that time was spent talking to someone. It was looking at images.
Yeah. Now this is so yes, I would say, okay, so I'm of the generation that's kind of between the generation you're talking about, Imagine, and your generation. So I know a little bit of both of these ways of life. I was the last generation to know a world before internet, and so it's I tell people when I was in the library, people were making fun of me. Oh, this internet, it will never take off. Now we see it inseparable basically from everyday life. I mean, I think even certain religious communities like the Amish or something, they're not totally removed, they still interact with people that are, still using it. So I think this is one of the modern day challenges when it comes to meditation. And I want to ask you some other, like, what else do you see when it comes to meditation? But I think this is the biggest one. I'm curious now, how do you work with, and also for myself, I've noticed in my own experience, when I am like talking like this, I can have more opportunity and space to be mindful. It's not that big of distraction. But when I'm interacting, constantly, either typing or using a screen scrolling or a touchpad on my. So anytime I'm interacting with this machine, a lot of times, oh, there's so much. Okay. One of my teachers said it's basically greed that I want to get things done and keep pushing myself. And I didn't see that. I mean, it's completely obvious now, but I didn't even see that. It's just greed that I just wanted to keep getting things done because I identify with doing and accomplishing, yada, yada. But even to the point where I feel my body tensing up, I feel the mind state that's not really helpful or wholesome, and I'll override that to push through to do something. So do you even gone through trying to develop some kind of having some kind of mindful device interaction, other than a complete abstinence? And I've done that too for the first time probably since the 90s. I did a whole month in Korea Zen retreat where I handed in my electronics, and let me tell you, I had no idea how much my sense of reality is now tethered to devices and interacting with them. It was quite an eye-opening experience to really see how serious this can be. So yeah, I guess practical things, inside and outside of meditation of this, and any other challenges you see with students, and then if there's any link to the breath too, because I know the breath can be a really good gauge of just how we are. Because it's at Anapana, Lumpur Suchito talks about how the Sanskrit is prana. So it's like a life force energy. So for me, it's also a really good gauge when I can be mindful to notice it throughout daily life. The more constriction there is in the breath, it's kind of a gauge of what else is going on. The more ease and free flow and kind of more energizing on the in breath and relaxing and releasing on the out breath. So in that sense, but yeah, what have you come to learn and know about this?
Well, usually that depends on who I'm talking to. But if I just address the things that you've brought up, I might suggest that depending on what is most obvious to you, um, for example, if you're aware of tension in your shoulders, the more that you're clicking on the keys, take a moment to relax that just a little bit. And secondly, you might experiment with slowing down how fast you type. One of the things that we do when we're on retreat is we slow everything down. And while I wouldn't suggest that you do work on the computer the way we do walking meditation so slowly, even just a little bit increases mindfulness and awareness of how what you're doing affects you. And then you can begin to naturally, it will change over time. Some people set timers every 10 minutes and they take a minute to take a break and just breathe. Thich Nhat Hanh, one of his practices every hour was to have a bell rung. And people just stopped whatever they were doing and just paid attention to their breathing or just being. We become a culture of doing, not of being. And so I would give you permission to experiment. Try different things and see what works. and what has a beneficial effect, and then go from there. And I have a number of students who work on computers. Some just inputting data, some are more creative, making websites. Some are involved in AI, some are involved in security of the computer whole system and process. And each one finds something different that helps them reconnect with being rather than.
It is. And I don't think it's cliche to say, yeah, we are human beings, not doing. It's a really good point. And just to echo the fact, we think when you drive in a car, how much we miss. And then when we ride on a bicycle, kind of how much we miss. And even when we're walking fast, and then even slowing down. I mean, I was in the forest in Norway, and I could just bend down and look at this little section of the forest. It's like this huge microclimate and world within itself. And usually just walk right by it. I could spend um, the attention spans lengthen and that's another thing we've a lot of us, I feel I could say that our attention spans are so fragmented now due to different media and different causes and conditions, but to just sit and find fascinating and enthrall all the different tiny things that are going on, it's one little patch of the forest, and that can be brought to our breathing and how, yeah, every breath there's no breath, there's similarities, but each breath is uniquely different. And
Yes.
we've been, I think, conditioned, at least in the West, as far as I know, most of the time, to have, at least with media, that, you just think 20 years ago, they used to show long shots like on movies and TV shows, but now it's just even a few times a second, and just kind of disoriented and fragmented in our attention, and really having a long attention span is huge. One of the things I was experimenting with too is sitting in meditation, and then coming out and then grabbing my device and then just paying attention to how long it takes before I lose mindfulness and just have no awareness of, just being completely absorbed into the screen, and then realizing, okay, I'd sit that down, come back to sitting, start over, and then maybe building a muscle that way. So that's one way I have experimented. Yeah.
And if you found success with it, keep doing it.
It's a really good point. The Buddha talked about, he was a pragmatist.
Yes.
It wasn't all theory and philosophy, skillful means that were
Yes.
in the real world, not theoretical things. So yeah, I will
Right.
definitely echo that. Yeah.
Right. You mentioned movies with that promote a short attention span. One of my favorite movies is The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit. What was his?
I'm familiar with the title. I don't know if I've seen it all, but please continue. Yeah.
But one of the things that I found after watching it for like the fourth time was just how long the takes were. The camera following someone for a long period of time, even through doorways and into other rooms, and being able to watch how people moved. A contemporary person closer to our time than the man in the gray flannel suit was John Cassavetes. And he was known for his long, long take that had an effect on who chose to watch his movies, because some people didn't have such long attention.
That's right. And I think of, just while we're on movies, I think of this Hitchcock film, Rear Window, where it's all just in one room,
Yes.
and I guess it had different angles, but to be confined in that, and what's the old saying now, I'm free associating here almost, that I forgot who said it, basically the problems in the world come down to not being able to sit alone with yourself in a room, and so meditation makes that possible, and it's just amazing how much kind of problems dissolve solve themselves when we're able to do that. And of course, then I think of a juxtaposition on this. Last movie reference here for a while from me is this movie called Cloverfield, which I think it was J.J. Abrams. And now I'm going to have to edit this out because I hear I broke my own rule. But anyway, so here it is. Where I think the entire film was shot in one take. However, there's a lot of distracting things going on in it because it's like an action movie, and there's kind of ridiculous violence and stuff. But apparently, I think maybe it was an ode to the past where you do these really long takes. But yeah, I think I look at some of these, I put some of these older movies on sometimes, and I even in myself, I feel that I've been conditioned where I just get more disinterested. I mean, I think the pace of life is faster now. When I look back in my movie buff days in college, and I was able to sit through a lot of old classics, I think a lot easier than I am today. So these are really interesting phenomenons, how we can, maybe due to a Nietzsche, things change quite a bit. But there's also these universal qualities that are still there, I think, that are timeless no matter what area or arena we're in or what the culture we're in. And of course, to bring it back to the breath I feel is one of those. So no matter whether we like it or not, as long as this body is still alive, there's breath coming in, breath going out. It's just a matter of how tuned in we and how much we notice of it as well. Yeah.
And there's a lot that happens in between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. But
well, oh, please. Yeah.
It's easily said, but it's not an easy practice.
So let's just...
Even just paying attention to the breath is a challenge.
Well, I know for me it is too, and it's been my primary practice for the last couple of years, and still, I've touched into it in the prior years of practice too. So let's talk about kind of these more practical ones, distractions, right? So concentration practice, if we're using it for samatha practice, the breath, the effect of it is non-distraction. So we touched a little bit about real world distractions. How do you deal with, I think the common one you talked about a little bit earlier is kind of the wandering mind. Now, I talk to teachers who will say, well, thinking isn't the problem. It's okay. And then they go into kind of really vast detail of basically what it amounts to. It is a problem. And then I've had teachers that just flat out say, thinking is a hindrance. So, but there is a place for thinking. We have to have it in our lives certain times, right? And it makes sense for critical thinking skills. I think a lot have gone away too. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. At the same time, it's not the tool for everything. I think, at least in my experience, I've got kind of validation and praise for certain types of thinking and mental activity. We look at some of the workplaces and how people are expected to be engaged with the mind all the time, and so, like, what is the right relationship to this? How do you deal with this? Maybe when in meditation, outside of meditation, if there's overthinking, but also just how we can befriend the mind, but also be stern if we need to be with it, or just in general, anything you want to think about, say about this, and especially in regards to breath meditation and working with it with breath meditation.
Well, I see the mind as a tool, but not the only tool in the toolbox. And very often we get used to and end up with a favorite tool. But that tool isn't appropriate for every situation. But to continue with the metaphor, the body gets used to holding that particular tool in a certain way. So when we let go of it, it feels like something is missing. And we yearn for it. And we want it back because we want to, if it's a hammer, beat something. If it's a screwdriver, we want to turn something. And I don't take either position to be the only possibility. Thoughts are a hindrance and bad, and we have to get rid of them. Or one student reminded me of something I said the first session that he came to see me. He asked me about thoughts, and I said, "Well, just think of them as like clouds. Just let them pass through." And that allowed him to develop more concentration rather than clenching very strongly to the object of the sensation of the breath. For him, that would have been antithetical to his nature. And sometimes if we pay attention to thoughts that are racing along, it only gives them more energy. And the Buddha even said that anytime something becomes an obsession, better to let go of it and turn the mind to something wholesome or neutral. And then when the mind calms down, then if a thought arises, we can look into it and see what it's about. Be curious about it. Be investigative. Observe it. Then it ceases to be in control of us, and we're just observing it. And everyone will have success with a different method or a different attitude. So I think the most important thing is to find what works for you.
Really good points. So I guess some other things that will come up is hindrances. So we've kind of framed it maybe not a hindrance, right? So I guess how do you work with the hindrances? Do you deal with those directly, or how do you approach the hindrances?
On occasion, when a person is talking to me and it's just so obvious that what is coming up is they're wanting something that doesn't exist or isn't in their grasp. I might briefly talk about the hindrance. Each hindrance has an antidote. Let's see if I can remember all 5. So there's craving, wanting, desiring something. There's hatred, anger, judging, criticism. There is restlessness, agitation, anxiety. There is sloth and torpor. Sloth is a slow mind, slow to be able to notice what is being looked at. And torpor is a dull mind, not clear. And the last one, what is the last one?
Doubt.
Doubt, yes, of course. Doubting the Buddha's teachings, doubting one's teacher, doubting one's own experience, and doubt leads to a kind of malaise that can lead to not being interested in practicing. Because if we have what we call a really good sit, quiet, and then the next sit is full of thoughts, it's easy to doubt that, somebody is responsible for this, or the path itself is only for a few, not available to me. So, and then my teacher used to say,
Yeah.
We all have our pet hindrances.
For sure, yeah. It reminds me of that old Western Dhamma saying that it's nothing like a good sit to ruin the rest of the day. Meaning
Yes,
that you're trying to get back to the one that it was a good sit, and oh, I'd never live up to that again. Yeah, yeah. So
yes.
I always thought that was a good, humorous way to look at it. Yeah. Well, I guess one thing that comes up in my, I might as well just ask about the more as practical things as practice here. I've had it's an energetic blockage, I would say, in my nose from time to time. So sometimes it will flow, and sometimes it will be blocked up, and it's usually the right side. And I hear some people will say, well, normally, if you're paying attention, the one side of the nostrils will block up for a certain amount of time, then will open up in the other one to kind of give the other one a rest, right? Because I hear yogis say that. Then other people don't notice it, or this doesn't happen to them. But what I've noticed, it's usually just the right nostril for me. And I've had my nose broken twice back in the day with baseballs. So, um, yeah, how do you, is there, and then when I lay on my left side, it tends to open up a little bit. But how do you work with like physical things other than just saying, well, choose a different meditation object? Is there still a way to work with the breath? Or just maybe anything you have to offer around working with that, I guess.
Well, just taking your difficulty as a subject of conversation and connection between us, if the right nostril doesn't allow air to flow, uh, there's no point in frustrating yourself trying to make it flow through that. So if it does come through the left nostril, pay attention to that.
It's easier said than done, right? So the first step is catching that, and usually that's really what it takes, because then I can see in my own experience, oh, this is not helpful. I'm being in conflict, and there's agitation, and then there's aversion, and yeah, and when we can't see that, then there's really no hope. That's why mindfulness is so important. As soon as I can see that, and then say, wait a second, what are you doing here, Josh? Or this is not helpful. You're going to be in conflict with that. You're trying to force something the way you want it, and it's just not working, and you're still like ramming your head against the wall. I mean, that's kind of like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. So yeah, the first step is obviously seeing that, and then the Brahma Vihara qualities of bringing some compassion to that and kindness to that too, because yeah, and then when I remember that, sometimes the body will, and whatever's going on there will relax enough, and then the air starts flowing around again. So yeah, thank you for that helpful reminder. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, Jacques, I think we've covered some good ground here today. I appreciate you coming on. I want to see if there's anything else around the breath you'd like to talk about, and meditation in general, before we start wrapping up here. Um, yeah, and then while we do, um, while we wrap up here, maybe if tell folks, if you who is listening, if they're in your area, if they want to contact you, if you're still taking on students, if you want to um, take on any new students, if you're open to that. And I don't know if you want to give your contact information, or you just want, if people are, if you're interested in um, having people reach out to you, I'm totally okay with them going through me first and filtering that. If you don't want to give out any kind of contact information or anything like that, it's entirely up to you. And then you can leave with a message of what you'd like to take folks out on today.
Uh, I do have one or two spots that are available, although I'll be going on retreat in 2 weeks, just for 2 weeks. And then the middle of December through the middle of January, I'll be out of the country. But if someone wants to get in touch with me, my text number is 440-714-1476. I usually don't answer my phone. Email address is jr.m as in Mary, I-N as in Nancy, K-A, @mac.com. And something to go out with is I'm always amazed at how practical so much of what the Buddha taught applies 2,500 years later. And I especially enjoy listening to his conversations with just one other person, something to go out on. The breath is always there. If you're not breathing, you don't have to worry about it. So the breath is always there to notice. But if you're driving, don't focus on the breath, focus on what's in front of you. If you're walking, doesn't mean the breath is the best object for that particular activity. I find the soles of my feet touching the earth to be good for me. So, and be free to experiment. Find out what works for you.
Well, lovely, Jacques. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad I got a chance to meet you and come on and sharing your practical insights and wisdom and just your state of being and presence, and what a deep one it is. And I really appreciate that. And so may all beings everywhere out there come to cultivate optimal Sila, Samadhi, and Paññā for yourself and for others and for all beings everywhere. May all beings everywhere realize awakening and be free.
Thank you, Josh.
You're welcome.